Right, welcome back to the EMP podcast. We're on to episode 3, and today's topic is all on mental health, body image, bodybuilding versus disordered eating. So, we'll talk on the disordered eating first of all. We know the different types of eating disorders, and again, just to make a note from the start, I am not claiming to be a professional in disordered eating or a clinician in disordered eating, but going through things from being a small girl and the pressures as a young female that I've had to go through, and then working with hundreds of females and helping them to overcome their disordered eating. I feel like I have some practical and experience to be able to talk about it. I'm not saying from a clinical perspective that I have the qualifications. So just to set the tone from the start, that's very important for sure. When it comes to disordered eating, can bodybuilding and disordered eating marry up as one? And we're going to go probably down lots of different paths about the goods, the bads, the wrongs, the rights. And essentially, it's always about that person individually. For me personally, when I was a young girl, there was the need to be skinny. That was the thing. We all wanted to have collarbones on show, skinny faces, skinny everything. And I'm not saying that that's a bad look, and I'm sure that lots of people aim to have that look now as well. But that fixation can often then lead to something that can be very unhealthy. Looking for the collarbones, looking for more bones over time, really delving into that. And I think that that's where bodybuilding then comes a little bit negative in a sense when it comes to those that are already, I guess, a little bit predisposed to having the issues when it comes to disordered eating, because there comes the need in an off season to push. If you've already had issues in the past of binging, I'm not saying that off season is binging, but it's eating in a large calorie surplus and then being able to switch off that mindset to come into a calorie deficit. Maybe some of the issues that were underlying from previous times and previous history starts coming back a little bit. Same when it comes to those who have really restricted themselves before in the past, anorexia, etc., that they've found themselves in a situation where in a bodybuilding prep, because you're always needing more when it comes to the condition, when it comes to the leanness, and you get the feedback from the judges. That's not a negative thing, it's a subjective sport. That's where you get the feedback from to be able to apply. But in the same breath, if we've got young females that do have these issues, that want that more, and they're constantly told that they need to be leaner, if they've had the issues before or they are predisposed to having them, yes, potentially bodybuilding could make them a little bit worse. If I look to myself, for example, for me, when I was young, like I said, the need or the pressure was to be skinny. And I always wanted to be skinny. That's why I actually started going to the gym, because I had finished bodybuilding. I thought, right, if I can't bodybuild, I'm going to get skinny. Sorry, if I can't dive, I'm going to get skinny. So I went down the route of doing lots of cardio, really restricting myself in my calories. And I actually got really quite skinny, to the point where I remember one day my brother turned to me when we were at Christmas lunch, and he said, "You look really unwell, like really unhealthily unwell." I was like, oh, that needs to change. We've got a very open, honest relationship, me and him and the rest of my family, that I'm really appreciative with, because it keeps me on top form in a real world scenario, even if potentially sometimes you can get submerged a little bit into social media. So that's why I decided to make a change, and that's why I went down the route of something a little bit more strength based, and that's where bodybuilding came into it, because I liked to look great. Call it vanity or not, I liked to look great. I wanted to be strong, I wanted to build the muscle, etc. So the idea for me, instead of being skinny, was now to become strong. And then competing just kind of got carried away. But for me personally, working with someone like Kuba, who has And I say working with Cooper, obviously I'm with Cooper, he's my husband, but working with him as my coach, understanding that it is good to fuel the body. It's really important that you stay on top of the essential fats, female health, etc. And you might think, I'm a little bit contradictory because I took bodybuilding to the extreme of pushing to go to the Olympia. Yes, having assistance supplements inside, which affects things like that. And it just came part of the parcel because that was the goal, and it's something that I personally needed to do to achieve the goal that I did. But the actual thought process behind bodybuilding, food relationship, eating disorders, etc., for me, it pulled me away from that. Instead of thinking, I want to be skinny all the time, it actually came down the route of, okay, I want to be strong, I want to fuel my body with good foods, etc. Competing just became part of that. But from building up each time in an off season, taking time away from stage, I don't have any issues with either flicking on the switch to diet or flicking on the switch to off season. And I think that if you are new to competing, especially as a female, if you have the predispositions of issues in the past with eating disorders, or even just that you have a very obsessive personality, which most bodybuilders do, especially those who push on to be great, it's really important that you have people in your corner to look out for you in case those scenarios, in case there's anything that starts to flag up where you are getting to a position where an eating issue, etc., is becoming a little bit, you can see that it's starting to happen. For me personally, I have clients who have had eating disorders in the past. And when I say eating disorders, I had a lady, and I still work with her now, who had been hospitalised, never had a period, from nothing to do with bodybuilding, but just from her wanting to have that, or pressure to be skinny. It was her coping mechanism. Lots of people's coping mechanism when they get uncomfortable or they need that comfort is that they turn to food. Those who have severe eating disorders from a restrictive perspective, actually you find that their coping mechanism to help themselves feel better in the moments of feeling like they need that comfort is to restrict, to almost make themselves feel worse in order to feel like they are feeling something. And in those instances, you have to be very careful when you are coaching those individuals. And if you do not have the patience for it, I think that you do have to be very honest with that person, potentially say that you don't or aren't that type of coach to be able to give the patience and care for them, especially so that they don't go into their old ways. But I have a client, and I've had clients, current and past, that does struggle with this issue. From the off, I've always said I don't think that going down the route of a competition prep would be the best choice, because you've had the predisposition. A bodybuilding prep is very obsessive. You are going to get very fixated on the fact that you need more shreds, you need more glute lines, you need more everything. Whereas, yes, potentially bodybuilding is obsessive even from a non-competitive perspective, but if you take away the actual competition prep, especially the last little part of it, it is very healthy. You focus more on fueling the body, the strength, giving enough fuel to the body to be able to look great, obviously not get out of shape, but also have enough body fat on your body that you can function as a human. And the lady who I'm currently working with at the minute, she'd never had a period. She currently now has a period. This is her third one through. I'm not saying that they're regular like a usual period, but she's very grateful for the fact that when we first started, I set the tone from the off that I don't think standing on stage is something that is going to be the best thing for you. However, we can still bodybuild. We can still create great habits, which is what bodybuilding envisions, which is strength, fueling the body right, even when it comes down to the health supplementation, keeping on top of blood work, etc. All these different things to actually care for yourself and your mind is very important. I've seen competitors in the past who have potentially not had that same level of support and same level of care to their process. And for them as people, in that they've had predispositions of things like being anorexic before, and because they've not been given that care, been given that support, because they've kind of been emaciated during preps and things like that, it's created for them old issues to come back. So for me personally, I'm not saying that, those who have had things like anorexia, restrictive mindsets before, that a bodybuilding competition can't happen, because I'm sure that there are some exceptions to the rule. But I would say, to begin with, first things first, it's about healing, it's about recovering, it's about being okay with eating, being okay with fueling the body right, and actually feel confident in that approach with that as well. We can move on to the opposite end of the scale when it comes to binge eating or overfeeding, obesity, etc. Again, other forms of eating disorder, just on the opposite end of the scale. Those who've been through an actual competition prep, after a competition prep, or even right to the very end, the food focus, or in modern terms that everybody talks about now, the food noise, becomes very loud. Me, as someone who's never really delved hard prior to bodybuilding, having really bad eating issues or anything, I mean, like I said from the off, when I was younger, I wanted to be skinny, etc., restricted, but as soon as someone said, you've taken it too far, I took a step forwards to get myself back into a better place. I haven't come from that negative environment in that I've overly restricted, I've overly overfed. I came from just kind of a middle ground. And even for me, towards the end of a competition prep, that food noise is very loud, that want to eat more is very loud. So I can only imagine for someone who has the predispositions, has had issues with binging, has had issues with overeating before, it just gets worse. Again, there might be exceptions to the rule that people can go through a competition prep and end up in a position where off the back of it they're still fine. With care, and I'm sure that they can be, but I'm sure that even 95% of people that have had these issues before, even if they do get the care off the back of it, they get the regular feedback, they have good communication, they have tools and tips from their coach to be able to overcome these issues, that 95% of people likely go back into the issues of binging, secret eating, etc. because a bodybuilding prep creates for that noise to be loud. Again, nothing wrong with a competition prep at all. I've done it for 10 years. I absolutely love it. I would never change it. I will still continue to diet like a competition prep where I don't have an off-plan meal, etc. Getting myself low body fat for photo shoots because I love to do it. Probably not taking it as extreme as the end of a comp prep where I'm losing my period and stuff, but I love it and I will continue to do that. So I am not knocking bodybuilding in any sense. But if you do have even signs of these issues becoming a thing, it's time to take a step back before you potentially go down the route of going into bodybuilding a little bit deeper. And if you have had these issues before, for sure, don't allow for them to be your identity, but be aware of the fact that if you are starting to hear the noises, or you are starting to delve into being over restrictive again, maybe it's time to think about a bodybuilding from a non-competitive standpoint, to make sure that your mental health can stay in a really great place. Otherwise, all that hard work that you've done to potentially put yourself into a great place could potentially get undone for a few competition preps that you want to do, but then you've got to live within that body and live within that mind for the rest of your life. So bodybuilding isn't a negative, but if you do have the issues that get brought on from the obsessiveness that bodybuilding can bring, or predisposed issues that you've had before are getting worse, maybe it's time to think about maybe not doing a competition prep and even having that conversation with your clients and your coach. There are exceptions to the rule, but you do have to be very self-aware. You do need to make sure that you've got the right coach behind you to give you the guidance that is needed to make sure that everything can stay really well. When it comes to creating balance as a competitor, it's really important, because you can have an all or nothing mindset, and I get that. In comp prep, no off-plan eating, focus on the goal, etc. If you are coming towards the end of it's funny because you get clients that say it, this is going to be my best off season. I'm not going to have my off plan meals. I'm going to stick 100% with it. I've got such a good routine. I'm going to be able to commit to every single part of it, even post show. Thank you so much for everything. And then they get to post show, and then it all goes to shit. And it can happen, and then people can claw it back, and then they can get better into the future, etc. I'm not saying don't try bodybuilding, by the way. I'm just saying, as an awareness, just be aware of these different things to make sure that you can try and keep yourself in a good space as you move forwards further into life. I've come away from bodybuilding competitively with my hand held high at the Olympia level without any issues mentally, hormonally, physically, food relationship wise, etc. And if I can help others to be able to do that by taking the time to get to where they want to be, listening to any issues, I want to be able to do that, and I want to be able to help absolutely everyone do that. But creating balance is important. When you're in your off seasons, you don't have to have a meal off every week, but when you're in a competition prep, they're not going to be there. Don't have an all or nothing mindset when it comes to your off season. Be like, right, okay, let me allow myself to be able to prove that I can eat like a normal person, I can have a meal out with the family, and I can just get back to my plan. So that it's a lifestyle. It's not just the sport of bodybuilding, because those types of scenarios and situations are what are going to happen after bodybuilding. So trying to set yourself up for success afterwards is very important in the now. So don't try to be overly restrictive when it comes to your off season. Don't overdo it. Don't binge eat. Don't buffet style eat when it comes to your off plan meals. Food's always going to be there. Don't be ordering 15 different takeaways to have a little bit of everything, or going to an all-you-can-eat buffet, or filling your bag of pick and mix with as much as you can possibly get and making yourself feel physically sick every single week. But go and have a meal out like a normal person. Take a couple of meals out your normal plan. Have something in terms of portion that you'd give to your grandma or your mum, etc. Eat like a person rather than a bodybuilder, a hungry bodybuilder. And that will put you in a great position to be able to be okay with eating off plan in an off season, and then going, right, I'm ready to be able to diet right now. That comes down the route of starting to become okay with, gaining weight, losing weight, etc., which I think is a different topic that will go down the route of at some point in the future, because learning to be okay with the peaks and troughs of bodybuilding is definitely a topic that I feel we need to cover from a male perspective and a female perspective. Learning to be okay when we're a bit softer, learning to be okay when we are getting a little bit leaner, the different feels that you will get during that time, just so that we can all start to enjoy every single part of bodybuilding. But I will definitely cover that, even though it is very relatable to this topic. I will cover that as a separate topic 100%. But body image is definitely a huge thing, definitely comes into disordered eating, but I do think it needs to be a separate little topic to be able to speak on, because I am a female. I've had to do extremely heavy off seasons. I've had to do very heavy diets to make sure that I can get into the shape that I needed to. But I needed to do the heavy off seasons to be able to put the mass on to be able to get in shape. So I understand the trials and tribulations, the positive and the negative things that comes with that, especially being a female, and how you feel, especially in the off season, being a bit out of shape or being a bit heavier, I guess we could say, and actually being able to overcome that over time and being okay with the fact that that is something that is temporary. But we're definitely going to draw that back right now, and we are going to focus on the mental health side of things and the food relationship side of things. So off seasons is where you can create healthy habits, being able to balance the meals. A prep is likely when things from an extreme obsessive personality perspective will start to creep in. That's why, it's not a sustainable way of living, that type, but dieting can be, and it's something that is healthy. Being hungry is something that is healthy. Many people get frustrated, scared, worried about that feeling of being hungry because it's uncomfortable. But apart from when you're right at the end of an off season, I don't think that there should be a day that you go without having some form of hunger. It shows you that your digestion is on point. And I do often find that people who do struggle really bad with binge eating, overeating, etc., do really struggle with being okay with feeling hungry. even if they're a little bit out of shape, you'll find that they feel hyper, like what we do when we're in a competition prep. You feel that warm feeling, that more salvation feeling, because we're focusing on the food. That's the same with someone who struggles with overeating, struggles with being able to control their food noise, etc. They think about food, it makes them more hungry, it makes that salvation, that hyper style feeling happen, which is then when usually the derail of then overeating starts to happen as well. So, bodybuilding and mental health. I personally never had a massive issue with my mental health. However, the only times that I've ever truly felt awful was definitely when I went down the route of utilising assistance. So, when it comes to PDs as a female, as a male, you'll have a stable platform always of at least TRT, so testosterone replacement therapy. Sure, it's becoming more common for females to have TRT, and that is something that I utilise within my time as a bodybuilder due to the fact that from dieting heavily, off-season heavily, and obviously utilising PED cycles, my hormones are very up and down to try and keep them a little bit more stable. That's why we used the TRT, and also because I had a little bit of a decline in my own personal testosterone. What I will say is that my testosterone, I never allowed for that to be above range. That didn't stop virilization happening, but we did not let it go above range. However, even being on that, the cycling on and off of assistance still mentally was tough. So if you're someone who struggles quite heavily with mental health anyway, and again, as I said about the food focus issues, I'm not claiming to be a mental health specialist. However, being a coach, you do end up being a therapist, life support, etc. And I feel like I'm a lady who's a little bit older. I've gone through lots of things, being able to problem solve when times have gotten a little bit difficult. Definitely gone through peaks and troughs in emotions in my own personal journey throughout my life. But I feel like from an experience perspective, I can be a good support and a consistent support for my clients. But if you do and have struggled with mental health in the past, I'm not saying that you shouldn't take assistance, but just be pre-warned that it can make it worse. Obviously you get the ups in terms of when you're on cycle, you get that real egotistical feel to yourself, and then you come off, and then you go more, you feel, I feel a little bit lower, I don't have that same confidence anymore. I like to call it liquid confidence. You know how you go on a night out, you're someone who doesn't like to go on the dance floor, you then have a drink or two of your favourite drink, and then all of a sudden you get that little buzz and you get that confidence and you're on the dance floor even though that's not potentially your normal personality. Assistance definitely does give you that same type of vibe. And I'm sure that, like myself, when I was in the thick of it, I probably would have listened to a podcast like this thinking, shut up, no, I'm fine, I don't get affected in any way at all. You do. I can promise you that you do. And it'll probably take for you to get further into the end of your journey, or maybe when you finish your journey, to actually take some ownership. Or at least be confirming to yourself that, yeah, potentially that did happen to me as well. But there is definitely times when mentally I felt extremely low. I don't talk about my mental health often because I'm someone who has never, I wouldn't say that I struggle with it. I'm not someone that's like had end of life thoughts, etc. And I'm sorry if this is getting a little bit serious, but there's lots of people that are in the world, and I think it's good and important that we do talk about it so that people feel like they can reach out, that they can speak to others, etc. I'm very, very lucky that I have the partner that I have, because there was some very dark times for me last year when I was in the biggest part of my year as a competitor, and there was obviously more assistance in play because usually I would only do 1 to 2 cycles per year that would be like 8 weeks long. Obviously competing at the Olympia last year, there was a cycle at the start of my first comp prep, cycle towards the end of my competition prep, obviously taking that time off in between. time off again, and then back in when it came to the Olympia. So it was very up and down, and you get them waves, and it really did hit me quite heavily in my actual comp prep between finishing my pro show wins and then going to the Olympia. And I'm very lucky that I had the support of Cuba to be able to talk about how I feel, and talk about the way in which my mind is thinking, etc. It never deviated me away from anything that I was trying to do. I showed up every day and gave absolutely everything. Nothing got affected, but just mentally there was times that I didn't feel my best. There was definitely times in the past, in my off seasons, when I'd taken things before and then came off, etc., that I felt a little bit like that as well. And I guess we could say, we're using female-friendly drugs and things like that. I mean, nothing's friendly, nothing's safe, there's nothing that is risk-free. Yes, we always use very small doses. Yes, we went for compounds that were always very female-friendly. But, it's part of the assistance side of bodybuilding that people often don't talk about too much, especially from a female side, in that, as females, we go through different cycles in our emotions throughout the month anyway, because of our monthly cycle, the dips and drops and whatnot, we get in progesterone, estrogen, etc. And then you add in assistance to the mix that creates even more of that chemical reaction, and it can make you just feel a little bit low at times. Again, I wouldn't change anything that I've done in my journey, and I definitely got through those difficult times 100% with my own mindset, my own way to be able to problem solve, but also having great people in my corner, my friends, Cuba, my family, to be able to overcome that. But mental health's a huge thing, not just from a bodybuilding perspective, but external bodybuilding. But if you are someone who has had issues before when it comes to mental health, assistance might be something that you need to think about, or be aware that it might create for those feelings to come back again, not stopping you from doing it. It never did for me. And then when it comes to, the bodybuilding side of things, when it comes to post-comp, you feel a little bit low, not from the foods or anything like that we've already spoken about, but even from what's next. Oh, the post-show blues are here, etc. And if you're someone that doesn't feel that way, I'll take my hat off to you, because there's always a little bit of something. Yes, that goal to want to be better and that goal for stage is always going to be there, but definitely in the first couple of weeks post-show, you do just feel a little bit different, is the word. You're starting to come back to homeostasis, your emotions are coming back because you're not dead on prep anymore, etc. So it's just something that you have to try and overcome. Again, I wouldn't change any part of my journey, but I think it's just important that we talk about it, create education around it, so that people feel like if they are going through difficult times like that and still want to commit to that process, that they feel like they've got an open space to be able to talk about it. So, eating disorders, bodybuilding related, mental health, bodybuilding related. If anybody has anything that they would like me to cover, please drop a comment below. If you've got anything that you've got in terms of questions, or you'd just like to reach out to have someone to talk to, please always hit me up in my DMs. Always happy to help, always happy to support, especially with this beautiful sport that we do, that is bodybuilding. Like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. We'll be back again soon.